Good morning. This is Glenn McKnight from the Virtual School of Internet Governance, along with Bill Jouris, a senior advisor with the school. Welcome to the call today. This is our Group L actor module, and we welcome the students to look at the material that we have in the course. And we've already shared the article by Alexander, and I'll be sharing with you later Marita Moll's article. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Karen. Welcome, Marita. Welcome, Alex, and obviously Bill. So maybe if we can just go around the table, starting with Karen first as a quick introduction.
All right. Thank you, Glenn. I'm Karen Mulberry. I'm a senior manager of technology policy at the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, IEEE, and I'm in the Standards Association. And I work at the intersection of technology and policy to try and pull the evolution of product development and standards into the world of governments and policies and regulations so that we can balance the two between what is valuable and what is useful, and we tend to avoid unintended consequences if possible. Back to you, Glenn.
Great, thank you. Over to you, Marita.
Good morning. My name is Marita Moll. I'm coming to you from Ottawa, Canada. And I've been involved in community applications of internet, how it's used in communities and how it's supported in communities since the 90s. I'm the president at the moment of a loose organization, think tank called Telecommunities Canada. I have been on the board of CIRA, Canadian Internet Registration Authority, and I have for kind of 8 years toiled in the trenches of ICANN, which kind of gives me the perspective of how things are working on the ground. I've also done quite a bit of research on network and community networking in the Canadian context.
Great. Bill, for the sake of consistency, a quick introduction, please.
Yeah, my name is Bill Jouris. I'm a queer IT guy and got involved with ICANN a decade or more ago, working on their project for the internationalization of domain names.
That's it?
That's as much as it's relevant. I could go on at length about how we do computer networking and cryptography, but it's a bit off topic.
Yeah, we're not interested in that. Okay. Okay, we'll turn over. Thank you, Bill. Alex?
Hi, Alexander Klimberg. I'm flying under the flag of a senior fellow of the Hague Center for Strategic Studies. So I'm a career think tanker. I'm also a member of 5 other think tanks. And policy advisor. I've worked on internet governance and international cybersecurity issues for about 15 years now. I was executive in charge of the Center for Cybersecurity at the World Economic Forum and also headed a number of multi-stakeholder initiatives that try to bridge international cybersecurity and internet governance.
Great, thank you. So we all know we're here for one particular reason. We want to talk about multi-stakeholderism. And what inspired me to create this panel, because I know everyone here except Alex only through his articles. He did 2 great articles in Circle ID, and I mulled over the article again yesterday, and it was clear. It was an interesting he said, she said type of article, because the nemesis to Alex was our good friend Milton Mueller. And Milton's a passionate person, deeply involved with NCUC. You guys, if you don't know Milton, he's very prolific. Him, William Drake are probably the poster boys of internet governance in the U.S. He was with Syracuse. He's now with Georgia. But he's articulate. He's passionate. But he takes a he takes a diametrically opposed view with Alex. But I'm going to turn it over to Alex, and he's going to give an overview, start off with a bit of history, not to bore you, but I think it's important. Over to you, Alex.
Yeah, I certainly don't think it's boring. In any case, I actually go with Kofi Annan that the internet needed a policy miracle to effectively accompany the technical miracle that it is, and multi-stakeholderism is it. So even though I've been concentrating on the technical nut and bolts of cybersecurity in particular for quite a while, I've always been fascinated by this evolution of governance that the internet has basically brought, and that's multi-stakeholderism. So I want to briefly just overview where that came from. As you pointed out, the debate between friend Milton and myself goes quite into the weeds. We can definitely visit that, but it also is a little bit about one of the core issues in multi-stakeholder thought, which is the interplay with state power and how that is best accomplished. So basically, multi-stakeholderism, which of course everyone on this call will know, is the current most prominent model for the management of internet resources. And it came about really, as I said, as a call from UN Secretary General Kofi Annan's plea to help save the UN negotiations on WSIS, the World Summit of Information Society, that ran from 2003 to 2005, and to this day are the only real UN consensus document on how the internet should be managed. In 2003, in Geneva, it became apparent that states were finally waking up to the potential of the internet and weren't happy with the structure that had already established itself, which was effectively non-state actors in the lead, with the exception of the United States at that time, which had a very specific role, which had, however, were passed on later on. And since it looked like the WSIS was going to fail in 2004, parts of the internet community picked on a mode of thinking that had already been prevalent in other parts of government and governance for about a decade at that point, and that was multi-stakeholder thought. That itself is a development from academic thought in the 80s about how power is not only a question of states, but also of civil society actors and NGOs and similar, and also trade, and that we need to think about it. So I also teach international relations. I taught at the Harvard Kennedy School the first seminar on international cybersecurity. And this transformation of power is a core part of what we do in international relations. And multi-stakeholderism really shows that. So in the 80s, this was talked about in academia. In the 90s, it was first used in government, in particular, I think most interestingly by the UN, to deal with this new climate diplomacy scenario that had just come about. So the Rio Earth Summit, which was the first of a series of summits that we now know under COP. So if you think about the big climate summits that happen regularly, the Rio Summit was probably the first. That was the first time in the mid-90s that the term multi-stakeholder was used. In that context, it was clearly along the lines that academia, civil society, private sector all had an important voice, but they were kind of subordinate to government in this, that governments were still going to decide. But it was the idea of we need to listen to these other voices and we need to involve them. The internet went further and basically in 2003, 2004 said, well, basically the private sector owns most of the internet and continues to build it. Civil society codes most of the internet and runs its core infrastructure. And government doesn't really do very much. It can blow things up, it can listen in on things, but it doesn't really build much in the internet. So we don't accept the role of just being an advisor to governments on how this should run. This is our internet and our rules, and you have to abide by it. This notion, which was basically that the internet belonged to the technical community and not to the rest of the world, has changed because you can't opt out of the internet anymore. It's not really a choice. You have to use it. So therefore, also the definition of multi-stakeholder has changed a little bit to also include more the rights of states to have an important view in this. But effectively, since 2005, we've had something called the Tunis document, which basically spells out what internet governance is, but also indirectly spells out what the multi-stakeholder model is. And in this document, you split the running of the internet into two bits, effectively the policy bit, which can include all kinds of issues, and the technical bit. The technical bit, it says quite clearly, should be run by non-state actors first. Now, there are many different reasons why this might be a good idea. I think not the best arguments are always put forward. Mostly the argument that's put forward is a pragmatic one, simply that it's impossible to coordinate. Governments don't know anything about this. Volunteers are in the forefront of writing the code, and they're not going to be told what to do by an intergovernmental community, similar things like that. But I think it's important to think about where some of this thinking came from. And this thinking was along the lines of that the internet, like the media overall, is too important just to leave to governments. It's effectively a sign of liberty. It's a sign of free expression. And if you pass this all on to government control, you're basically allowing government to educate what can be and what cannot be on the internet. And that's just simply too big for democratic societies to take. For the same reason, there are a number of governments in the world, starting with Russia, then China, and now then a coterie of authoritarian and semi-authoritarian states and also democracies that have increasingly had a problem with this view. In particular, in 1998, literally around the same time that ICANN was created, Russia put forward a proposal in the United Nations that sought to connect the running of the internet with what they called information security, which is basically the management of all types of information. This has continued to the present day in many different forms. The same resolution is more or less still there 25 years, 27 years later. This is and effectively also the model, the problem that we have today is that you have the multi-stakeholder management of internet resources, which is largely accepted, but you do have a very vocal and strong group, not sometimes summarized by BRICS nations, although that isn't completely accurate since both Brazil and India have supported the multi-stakeholder model in the past. But you have a group of nations that I call the cyber sovereignty nations that really want this model replaced by a multilateral one. And in particular, they obsess over different parts of the internet, like the DNS root zone file, and want that and the function that manages it, the IANA function, placed in the control of the internet of an international organization. The reason for doing so is very simple. Their overriding concern is content control. They are mostly interested, their biggest security concern is not cyber war, which is the concern of my diplomat colleagues in Western governments, but information war. And the worst outcome is not burnt out critical infrastructure like we have in the cyber war, but is regime change. So for that very simple reason, they really want to focus on internet governance, the ability to control content, and they think that the multi-stakeholder model makes that not only very difficult to do, but also allows Western government powers, in particular the United States, the option to subvert that through proxies. So that is more or less their view, and many Western governments state that they don't want this to go to an international organization because that makes it a single point of failure. It makes it more likely that things can go drastically wrong. That's fundamentally what many of these governments have really wanted for a long time, cyber sovereignty nations, is the ability to take down content they don't like globally, a global notice and takedown scheme. And that has always been the kind of like the objective to start. There's different ways to accomplish this. There's the ad hoc committee on the cybercrime treaty that recently failed in negotiations. That was showed very clearly where the interests lie. But it's also because the multi-stakeholder model as a term has become pretty entrenched. So it's now become popular to use the term. Since about 5 years or so, it's been also very prevalent in the UN. It's also become its own regular noun. So you sometimes refer to the multi-stakeholders as its own type of organization that needs to be involved in discussion. So multi-stakeholder, I'm glad to say, is still here. Is here to stay. I'm glad to say. On the other hand, it does need to develop because the internet of 2005 isn't the same internet that we have today. And many of the concerns, especially in the global south of other nations, of how the internet and multi-stakeholder model works are now even more valid than they were in 2005 because you can't opt out anymore. So for people like myself who clearly favor the multi-stakeholder model, there is a question of also how to innovate on what we have right now. And that's where I would leave it for the moment. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Great introduction. What came to my mind is a great quote from, and I'll have to paraphrase it because I didn't have a chance to do a quick search, but I remember Churchill talking about democracy. It sort of is similar to this discussion of multi-stakeholderism. It's the best of the worst, sort of syndrome. I'm going to turn to Marita. She's going to do a response and comments.
Yeah, it's not going to be, Marita speaking, it's not going to be a response in like, I disagree with you. No, great bit of history. And it's really important and interesting to know where this came from and how it evolved a little bit. One of the things I really enjoyed watching back, maybe it was a year ago, I don't know, I landed on it, but it was a video history talking to people who were very originally involved in the US. And it gave you a real feeling of how shaky it really was. I mean, it just kind of happened. It happened in the US that the DNS came together under something called ICANN at the time. It wasn't even formal. And it just happened to be this is the right people in the right place at the right time. And even though they didn't really know what they were doing or where they were going, things kind of held together. So it kind of had to happen this way. And it's very difficult to imagine a different system at the moment because it's it's global. It could have happened differently. Most definitely could have been completely a multilateral system. But the thing is that I'm pretty sure that if we tried to reinvent it now, exactly as it looks, multi-stakeholderism with the different communities, stakeholders involved, I'd bet anything that you couldn't get that going. You wouldn't be able to get that kind of cooperation going. It would have been the wrong time. Things have evolved a lot further. So important to recognize that this is here now. Yeah, there's lots of things about it that are difficult and not working too well. And it's evolved as Wolfgang Kleinwachter. I just love that quote of his that it started out as a technical problem with political implications, and now it's a political problem with technical implications. So true. I'll just leave it there right now that to just underline what Alex said. It's important to understand that this evolved this way, and that's really important that we have it now, and we must not let it go, basically, as far as I'm going. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I was part of a group in 2004 in Geneva. We had a booth and we were promoting open source or free and open source software, FOSS, at the location. And all of this discussion of multi-stakeholderism was happening somewhere in the building, but I wasn't part of it. Everything we were discussing was a person named Richard Stallman. I don't know if that name rings a bell with anybody. Richard was arguing with the translators on the word Libra or free. With regards, they kept using the term free when he would express, and he was a bit of a character. I don't know if he's still alive, but he was very passionate, and it's kind of funny. At the time, we were not agreeing on much stuff, but as I've gotten older, it's kind of funny. I'm getting crotchety like Richard. Maybe it's a bad sign. I understand Richard now, but this stuff was happening, but it was mostly by a very small, passionate group. It wasn't like, it was controlled by some kind of bigger power and people wanted to do it. And at the end of the Geneva, they said, we're going to go to Tunis now. And most of us said, no, we're not going to a regime that doesn't have liberty, and we don't trust it. And in fact, everybody talks about the Tunis agreement, but most of us were not there, but that's lost in the history. But that's a little tidbit. Did anybody go to Geneva or Tunis at the beginnings of this? No. Okay, I guess I have that badge of honor. Okay. Anybody else want to comment on Alex before I move on? Bill or Karen?
No, I think Bill or Alex framed everything very nicely in terms of the history. I think there was a lot of dialogue. And frankly, in my mind, when I look back at the creation of ICANN and the evolution of multi-stakeholderism, there was one simple event that I think set the stage for everything. It usually is one thing changes the direction of everything. And that was the US government couldn't figure out how to hold the contract for addressing. That simple determination actually created the large environment that we have today that, you know, created let's get all the interested parties together and have this dialogue. And it evolved into, you know, yes, the US government did hold a contract, but there were different aspects of it within the government's remit that they could act upon. The rest of it actually we owned, we were responsible for. And I think that form of collaboration actually set the stage for where we are today within the internet ecosystem, in terms of collaboration and contributions and recognizing various parties that are interested in the dialogue and bringing them in.
Great. Great. Thank you. That's a great insight. Let me turn back to Alex. Alex, where are we now? Is multi-stakeholderism on a life support? Is it healthy? Is it just going through another phase that will come out weaker or stronger? Or where are we right now?
Yeah, it's just come out of its awkward adolescence, teenage years, and now trying to find its way as a young adult, for sure. I think there's two main threats or three main threats that we have to the multi-stakeholder model as I see it. The first is one identified quite a while back. It's in an article I wrote for Wolfgang Kleinwächter for the IGF Bali called Watering the Grassroots, which you won't find anymore. And that argument is that the growth of the internet has basically put huge resource strains on civil society participation. So obviously governments and the private sector can scale up and they can fly around the world and they can do 10 meetings a week. And when I was, well-funded think tanker is pretty much exactly what I was doing, accumulating air miles by the hundred thousands and now I was having it funded. But that's, not everybody was able to do that, and funding for that runs out and things move on. Government and private sector have committed to it. So civil society has been getting squeezed out of this field. And this is part of the problem that we have, is that if we want to keep civil society in the game, then we really need to find new ways to support and grow the community, which is one of the reasons why I'm doing this here, is because I think we really need to make sure that there's a lot of people interested in this topic. And then we can also help secure more funding and getting people involved. So that's the first point, is that we have a huge resource crunch in the multi-stakeholder model. The second problem that we have is that it's a term, as the Chinese cyber ambassador put to me, oh, it's not politic to be against multi-stakeholderism right now. So it's one, is the thing. We've been victorious. However, now comes the big redefinition again and again of what it actually means. And it's constantly this attempt to put multi-stakeholder back in its place from the government point of view, particularly from some of the BRICS nations, which is like an advisory function. You're allowed to advise, but of course we still have the authority. And for people like myself who kind of stay put while a lot of the diplomats and officials kind of cycle through every 4 to 5 years, I find myself having to repeat myself every maximum 4 to 5 years and explaining to a new coterie of people, no, you can't just simplify this issue and give it all to the ITU or something. And that's part of the problem, is that there's these reinterpretations and of multi-stakeholderism to mean something else to what we have tried to make it over the years, is a real risk, because we have to provide we, a more liberal part of the community, have to provide more also alternatives to it. We need not alternatives to it, but innovations of it. How do we help grow it? How do we help address some of these concerns that are out there that now I think are more valid than they were 10, 15 years ago? So we do need to modify and expand on what we have right now. We have to do it in a way that doesn't break the core nature of it, and particularly this very freedom inspiring component to it, which I find the most interesting. But we do have a lot of these governments that argue that it's not possible that all this be run in the global north by a couple of tech companies. It used to be old white men. Likely let's all change a little bit. But there is a solid argument here, and I think we need to be more open to it, more than friend Milton has been in any case. And the third thing I would I would draw attention to is that the institutions can fail us too. So the article that I wrote was really kind of like a veiled attack on ICANN, because what ICANN has been doing the last 2-3 years, my view, is the wrong way to establish multi-stakeholderism as part of the international community. And that is that they have stepped back too much and have basically actively advocated a policy for arguing through friendly governments. So we really had a very unfortunate situation in IGF Addis Ababa, where a European diplomat was basically prompted to lecture the global South governments and civil society and businesses why they should support ICANN, because ICANN wouldn't do it themselves. So this, really expands the neo-colonial narrative that, and it also undermines the whole purpose of ICANN being a strong independent actor in this field. So I have a problem with this, and I've made it clear. That's where the article that I did, the exchange with Milton really came from. And I think we have to be wary of it, because if we allow multi-stakeholderism to not or if we don't allow multi-stakeholderism to grow to its extent, which means that it be incorporated in the international system, and that there's a proponent that fights for it, just like the international humanitarian law has the Red Cross fighting for it, then it's likely to get perverted again and again and again, and the cycles of diplomats will change and have to learn it all again. We need one stable point to help explain how this stuff works. In my view, there has to be ICANN, but ICANN has to do its work differently if it's going to be that flagship bearer.
Great, thank you. Excellent point. Bill's going to do a comment, or perhaps on another tangent. Go ahead, Bill.
I come at it from a somewhat different point of view, because the only part of internet governance that I've been involved with is ICANN. And my sense for quite some time has been, multi-stakeholderism sounds like a really great idea. We ought to try it sometime. Because
sounds like a Mark Twain statement.
Like democracy, yeah.
Because my sense at ICANN is, if it was multi-stakeholder at one time, it has evolved, and at the moment it is very close to becoming a trade organization. The so-called contracted parties, the GNSO, basically have a veto, and if they decide they're willing to tolerate something, it happens. If they want something to happen, it happens. And only if they're indifferent does something actually come from the governments, the end users, the security people, etc. It probably says something that the end users and the governments are advisory committees, not stakeholder groups. But that's basically how it looks from where I am on the ground. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think Marita is go ahead, Marita, and then we'll turn back to Alex to respond.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Alex, you're absolutely speaking my language when you're talking about the need to deal with a volunteer community and a business government community different. They're not the same. Everybody can say, oh, we're all volunteers, but that's not exactly true. There are a lot of people there who are actually working their jobs, who are allowed time off their jobs to do what they're doing because it's related, who are actually, that's their job. And they're classed in the same time as actual volunteers. I'm working on the end user community group. We don't have any other backup. We're just the people using the internet here and saying, how does this affect us? So that's a big problem. And it's a problem that ICANN has to address at some point. With respect to the what's happening on the international level, I hear you also. I have been definitely been I'm in that group, WSIS Plus 20 group that discusses what ICANN is doing at the international level. And I know they're struggling with their mandate, right? No, should we, is this our mandate to intervene here? And so that has to be boosted. I don't know to what extent having a new CEO might make a difference here. I'm hoping that maybe that will help some. We'll see. We don't know yet. Thank you.
Alex.
So two great points. Just to pick up, I think I'll pick up on Marita's point first before getting to Bill's point. So the resource crunch is real and is felt consistently, and I think that partly this can be really addressed with some of the internet governance institutions that have survived and prospered. And I do mean ICANN, I do mean ISOC, but I also mean the RIRs, whose function now is kind of like open a little bit, and like in what role they're going to play and where they're going to go. That they should be much more active than they have previously in trying to grow the community. Now, this is always a kind of a difficult point, because when you look at how much money they already spent, they're like, but we already do a quarter of our work is already this. That's the thing. I think we're talking about revolution purposes. We need to have not a quarter, but maybe even half of, like, we need at least twice as much resources. And it's not only money, because you need people to engage and time and consistency to help grow these things. So this is something that takes a while, and the only way to deal with this resource quote, these volunteers, and generate these volunteers, is really having a 5 to 10 year view. And the British government has taken now recently a view that the Chinese government has already had for 10, 15 years, which is like, yeah, our state needs to support involvement in this. I mean, Huawei and CTI have been flooding IETF working groups now for, I don't know, maybe 8, 9 years. And some of the things like the global undersea cable infrastructure standard norm setting groups, I mean, they regularly are swamped by engineers who are there on a mission with a very clear task. The French government has always known the importance of technical norm setting. Sometimes people used to say they over dramatized it in the 90s. Now everyone knows that they were right. So this realization is coming about. The UK now provides bursaries, for instance, so small scholarships for engineers to go, or even not policy people to go to these meetings. I think everybody needs to get into this. To get to Bill's point about ICANN's lacking multi-stakeholder credentials, yeah, 1,000%. It's also in my article or my blog post in Circle ID. The concern that ICANN has effectively become a trade organization, I think it's nearly close to being officially so, is given. It might even be considered captured. It's very strongly oriented to one very small group of actors, and those group of actors do also have a very clear, self-confident understanding of their own power, which, in my opinion, vastly exceeds what is politically feasible, despite morally justifiable. So I've had conversations with one of these people, of course I won't name the name organization, who have been heavily involved in this, and I described to them, like, well, Microsoft and Google, they've been now involved in the UN system and our first committee security discussions on cybersecurity, and they're heavily involved, and they spend a lot of time and money in getting there. It's like, yeah, we want to have those conversations. We want to be on the tables. It's like, but you're 1,000th of the size. You don't have any product that you sell. You got your position based on accident. You're basically running a monopoly, and you don't even take the time to work outside of your very narrow interested areas. Like, no, it's not going to happen. So the ICANN is the person we want to talk to for this, but you're inhibiting them from talking. So this is the problem, as I see it, is that ICANN really needs to and there's a lot of discussion of this, look critically at this relationship, because, and this is where the political stuff happens. All of this can change with the stroke of a pen. The biggest misunderstanding of every technician is like, oh, it can happen. It just doesn't. It can't happen. It's like, oh yeah, it can happen. Everything can happen, especially in the political side. Even if it technically doesn't make sense, it can still happen. And the fact is the IANA contract can't obviously be magically removed from ICANN, but a lot of things can happen that can basically pull away the international law justification for working with ICANN. Basically, accepting ICANN's role in the IANA process is a violation of sovereignty for every nation. I mean, we're basically giving a critical, a part of our critical infrastructure to a nonprofit based in California. We've accepted this because it works so far, but it won't be working so far if it officially becomes clear that they're in hoc to a very specific actor group, even if that was governments, right? Let alone like the private sector. So there's a lot of reasons why this needs to change. I think the new CEO comes from the technical community. He has a very good reputation with those he worked with. He worked also with the Swedish Prime Minister, Carl Bildt, who was one of the smartest people in the early phase of cyber and internet stuff. So there's hope that he understands this a lot better than his predecessor, who was a hard regulator and always looked at trying to rebalance ICANN from the flashy board level political play acting that Fadi Shehadeh had brought them into. But the pendulum went way too far, in my opinion, in Joran's tenure. It was very much security by obscurity. We just hide, hope nobody notices the internet exists or that ICANN exists, and everybody will leave us alone. And then suddenly get all in panic when the EU or the U.S. Senate, makes an utterance about it. So hopefully he will realize that some of the problems in dealing with ICANN are going to be very much in ICANN.org. Some of the people that have been there for too long or basically have accepted this whole idea that all we have to do is hide away and then everything will be fine. And I don't know how anyone can still think that in the last couple of years after what we've seen on the international stage. Things can change very rapidly. But unfortunately, the internet, as was pointed out beforehand, grew out of a matter of accidents, many of them fortuitous, right? And we might be running into a stage of many bad accidents happen. So some stuff happening that isn't so fortuitous. And so then we'll have to see. And my personal view is that things can go very badly for the internet. I mean, if we lose control over this, for my kids, this would be a disaster bigger than losing freedom of expression, because this is the medium in which we can even find out what freedom of expression means.
Before I go to Bill, and I'll table this idea because it's going to be a big discussion, is Project 2025 and President Trump. And we've seen his manifest destiny. We've seen him jumping all over the place. When he gets his attention on the internet, who knows what. So I just want to table that for now. And because after Bill's comment, I want to turn to Karen to throw her slides up. And she's got a brief presentation, and we'll go back to the general discussion if that's okay with you. So go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, anyone who thinks that governments can't act overwhelmingly compared to the rest of ICANN if they choose to, only needs to look at the occasion a couple of years back when the organization that was administering .org was looking at changing around, and the whatever you think of the merits of that particular change, it didn't happen. And the reason it didn't happen was the state, not national, the state attorney general in California basically said no. And that was the end of that. It didn't happen. So, and that wasn't even a national government coming in. So anyone who thinks that the technical community or the people who run the internet can ignore what governments are doing is, I think, delusional is probably too kind. Thank you.
Yeah, I come from being a board member on ISOC during that discussion, and everybody has this illusion that the groundswell of not-for-profits that came up and saved .org. That's not true. I agree with you, Bill, on that. Karen, do you have? I'm giving you shared access. So go ahead.
And you say I tend to think better when I. Oh, it says Sharon's not turned on.
Okay, they do. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, when I put things in writing, so that's what I'm doing. Let's see if I can. Sorry, I'm working on a split screen.
Oh, here she comes.
Okay.
Yeah,
so,
we can see it.
All right, and I just put some thoughts down on paper. I mean, and I spend a lot of time thinking about what is a multi-stakeholder, and do you really need to define what it is? Because I tend to think sometimes the definition boxes it in. There's a lot of things you hear about what is a multi-stakeholder. It's an essential framework for policymaking. It highlights, how you collaborate. It involves multiple people. It is based on some principles, although the principles tend to be defined by the group that is applying or espousing that it's a multi-stakeholder, which I find kind of fascinating because you can hide behind the word too. Much like you've noted with ICANN, having worked on the inside of ICANN, the actual what goes behind the scenes is a fascinating experience, which most people will never know how it all comes about. And so fundamentally, do you have all the transparency and accountability in place if no one tells you what's going on, internally to the external audience? So, we're in a very increasing interconnected world. It's technology based. It's, really needs a lot of collaboration from a lot of different sectors to accomplish anything. So to me, do you need it? Should we define it? Do we need to look at other things? And let's see if I can change. So there again, I was looking at, so why would you want to use the internet, the multi-stakeholder model? Well, it seems to be very essential. I mean, it defines forms of collaboration, especially for governance. I mean, you need collaboration to come up with the best solution. One mind can come up with something very brilliant, but if you have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or multiple collaborators from different perspectives talking about a solution, you tend to come up with an even better solution that fits not only the purpose that you're trying to address, but provides more guidance for the future and direction of how things are developed. So, it gives you that balance. It gives you an opportunity to innovate. It provides some trust and security, if interested parties come together and collaborate. So I think it's very important to have those diverse views and develop something like that. So I'm going to go into IEEE as an example, because we've been talking a lot about ICANN. And actually, IEEE is part of the iStar community, not closely aligned with ICANN and others because we're a distributed organization. We have, we're an umbrella. We have 76 technical societies where engineers work on very specific areas that they collaborate. Nuclear energy is one of them. I happen to work in the Standards Association where we collaborate with all of our societies on developing global international standards. So they develop what they want, but we have a very rigorous process to develop a standard, then have it adopted and branded as IEEE. So, technology is shifting an awful lot. That also means that we have to be rather nimble in how we address technology and how we collaborate on what it is. So here's a little background on IEEE. I mean, this is our mission statement, and we do abide by our mission statement here. We are looking at advancing technology for humanity. We are a very large technical professional organization. We have over 500,000 members globally. So we get a lot of different perspectives on, a technology and how it ought to be adopted and how it ought to be used. So it can be used in multiple countries. So it can have some benefits for multiple players. And that's important. So the Standards Association, there's a little background on the Standards Association. I mean, we're looking on advancing both technology and platforms, providing innovation, and in protecting safety, security, health, well-being, and contributing to a sustainable future. I mean, all of these, I think, are fundamental principles for just about everybody. And, there again, thinking about the multi-stakeholder model, these are the principles we abide by in terms of developing a standard. You've got to have collaboration and community building. interested parties have to come together to talk about something. And to help and contribute to a standard, you don't have to be an IEEE member to participate. If you have a problem that's technology oriented, we have a process where you can put it on the table and like-minded parties can come together and figure out, does it merit a standard? Can we develop it into a standard? Does it have a global benefit? So all of this, I think, is again an example or of how multi-stakeholderism can be applied. It's just not defined as multi-stakeholderism. So I think that, you know, as you roll through all of this and trying to define it, the definition tends to box it in. It's more about what it is and how it works than saying, you know, multi-stakeholder is X, Y, and Z. You need to focus on how it works. And if it's an open, transparent, and collaborative process, isn't that being a multi-stakeholder too? Anyway, you know, just some quick thoughts on what this is and how it might work, and how I see it from the IEEE perspective as almost a counter to ICANN, because we truly do walk the talk here at IEEE. So you do have an example where it does work.
Excellent. Great. Thank you so much. That gives us another level of another community that's involved in a very different way, very purposeful in terms of their standards. So any comment from anyone to Karen or question? Oh, go ahead, Marita.
Yeah, thanks, Karen, for bringing in a completely different model. I have a friend who has also been deeply involved in ICANN. You know him, Glenn Evan. He says, well, you know, there are different models, and we should be looking at how some of these other models work. And one of the ones he often brings up is IATA, the Air Transport Association, which you know, it does have components of different groups and stakeholders involved. I don't know very much about that model, but you know, again, yes, we need to look at other models. However, I think ICANN has the unique factor in that we've got a decision-making body here, where it's built into the bylaws, and there is some financial support there to keep some of the stakeholders moving forward. Not enough, but that's where I see the difference in ICANN is the ability. IGF isn't either a decision-making body, although it's often pointed to as a multi-stakeholder body, but ICANN holds that card, and I think that's really important to keep in mind. Thanks.
Good. Great. Thank you, Marita. We're getting close to the top of the hour, and I want to make sure that all of you have an opportunity to, after having a great discussion, to reflect on what we talked about and reiterate anything that, or elaborate on a concept that you're trying to make sure the students are aware of. Did anybody want to put a stab at it first?
I'm happy to put a stab at it first. You know, I think we've talked a lot about where the whole multi-stakeholder model originated and the importance of it, and actually allowing the internet to flourish. You know, without that initial collaboration and discussion on with all interested parties at the table, the internet wouldn't be where it's at today. Now, I know Alex noted that we're now transitioning from being a teenager to taking on adult responsibilities. We haven't defined what it means to be an adult in the multi-stakeholder model. And that's why I look at this and in terms of, you know, the definition could be holding us back. That maybe we look at the definition, or we come up with different approaches, because being, you know, a multi-stakeholder from 20 years ago doesn't work today. Alex noted that there are some limitations in terms of having all interested parties at the table. I do think there's a lot of value in, the pandemic taught us that we can do things virtually, like we're doing this session today. And then, and it's more open and collaborative to do that, to have everything be virtual. I know at IEEE, we do everything in a hybrid approach. So there's always a virtual option for people who are unable to travel to a meeting, because we want them to participate in the discussion, because that's very important to have different perspectives as you're looking at defining what a technology is and how it ought to be used. And especially if you want to consider, that the trust and the security and the safety of whatever you're doing, you need different perspectives to define that. So I think we're on this path, but we haven't figured out what it means to be an adult in our environment. And we're a newly formed adult. We're still maturing, and we're going to be maturing for a great number of years. Now, we do have some parents, as I like to think of them, in the UN system and others that are looking at, well, multi-stakeholderism really means it's multilateral, and governments are the best parents, and we will take care of you. I'm hearing quite a bit of that when you look at the Global Digital Compact and some of the things that have evolved behind that. And we don't necessarily need parents if we're an adult, but we do need to figure out how we can play in the world of adults and what that means. We still have a lot of work to do. That's all I can say. And create that environment so everyone can actually participate in defining, so what does it mean for us to be an adult?
Excellent. Thank you. That's quite insightful, Karen. Marita, final comments?
Yeah, I'll just throw in that before this, Alex's article was called Multistakeholderism and its Discontents. So I wrote down a number of things which I thought were my discontents, and we've kind of covered them. One of them was Western-based and American-centric, and that that's just causing it. It's going to cause us more trouble coming up. I'm sure of that. Stakeholders that are not equal. That we need meaningful participation on all stakeholders. That there's a domination by business in some cases, governments in other cases. That's another problem. Volunteer driven, which is leading to burnout on some volunteer levels, serious burnout. And the fact that it's very complex, whichever group you're working with, we've got a huge amount of complexity involved, and there's a steep learning curve. So not everybody is going to be able to play in this sandbox, basically, and we have to recognize that. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to turn to Bill and then give Alex the last word, as they say. Bill?
Yeah, I would just say we've talked about what Marita characterizes as our discontents, and I want to emphasize to the students, I especially may have come off very negative about a number of things, but it's more a matter of recognizing where the challenges are than throwing up our hands and saying, all is lost, walk away. None of us have walked away yet, and I don't foresee any of us doing so. So the opportunity is still there for new people to get involved and weigh in and help address some of these challenges. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Over to you, Alex.
Yeah, I'd like to build on those comments and say not only is the opportunity available, but it's urgently required that people take up this opportunity and that we also help them get there. So as a lot of the speakers here agreed, the civil society participation, the multi-stakeholder model is under threat. It's under threat simply from the resource angle, but also from the fact that it's been too focused on the established actors so far, and that the other actors that have an equal right to be involved in this need to be better better integrated into this. So this gets me to kind of like 3 points on the brief that, since you mentioned, the new administration's role and what they might do. So on the positive side, I just looked it up to confirm the 2014 letter by the to the chairman of the ICANN board on the need to separate IANA function came from 2 senators. One of them was John Thune, and the other one was Marco Rubio.
Oh,
So,
oh.
so I mean, these days, God knows that people don't get hold to what they said a couple of years ago, let alone 10, 11 years ago. But maybe somebody could shove this in his face if something starts going in a bad direction. If it does, we are going to really need ICANN and other internet organizations to show that they can stand on their own 2 feet and that they have a own voice, and that the internet community is global and that it's not in hoc to any particular government. And for that to happen, we really need, and that's my 3rd point, we need a lot more voices from outside of the bubble. And the bubble, as I said, used to be older white men technicians, and now it's just Europeans in the global north, and now it needs to expand. And that means that those of us, those watching this right now, and I do quite a few of these wherever I can, are most likely going to be in the global south or other places not having instant access to university programs and similar. All I can say is, please join, because we do need you. It's a lot of work and bureaucracy to do so. But the amazing thing is, once you put in that work, you actually get heard and invited. And I have come across some really quite amazing young people when running some of these multi-stakeholder organizations, but also when I was at the World Economic Forum, who did exactly that. It is actually possible. You will be heard. You just need to put in a lot of work, and it seems very unlikely, but there will be a payoff in the end. And if we do our job, more established actors, then there will also be the funding to be able to get you where you need to be so you can attend in person.
Great. I really like your approach. It's positive. It's not Pollyanna. It's definitely realistic. And I think we all have a moral obligation to assist those. And I'm not saying give up all your free time, but if we can nurture a young person who's getting involved and helping them a bit to see where in this murky ecosystem where they can have a voice. And I know we all have a opportunity in all of these organizations to revamp the fellowship programs so that the people can be streamed through the system with valuable mentorship. And that's really critical, because none of us had that mentorship when we got into this. We sort of had to, it's like learning sex on the side of the street. We had no instruction, right? There was no manual, right? So we survived, but it was painful, right? We have all the scars to show for it. Terrible analogy. I have to erase that. I'm sorry about the horrible analogy, but my brain works in a strange way. Thank you all. This is really, really better than I knew it was going to be good, but it was way better than expected, and all of you contribute substantial insights and personal opinions, and thank you so much. And all these recordings are available to any school of internet governance. So who knows who's going to listen to this? Maybe the FBI. I don't know. So we'll see. Again, thank you, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you all another time. Thank you.
And thank you, Glenn. Hardly anybody's
Thank
done
you.
as much as you have to get more people on board.
I hope so.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.